Welcome to Intel Focuses the Review series. Today we explain the German elections. You might be thinking, why should I care about German politics? Well, hold on to your hats because this election, the outcome, could send shockwaves across Europe. It could even impact your wallet here at home.
Yeah, it's true. Germany is a political and economic heavyweight in the EU. And this snap election comes at a pivotal time. Look around. The war in Ukraine, an energy crisis, and global inflation. Germany's decisions, they're going to have ripple effects, ones we just can't ignore.
So, okay, the stakes are high. But before we dive into all the drama, let's break down how this German election thing even works. I hear they have a unique voting system.
Right. Yeah, they use a system called mixed member proportional representation, a mouthful. It aims to balance the power of individual votes with fair representation for political parties.
So it's not just about picking your favorite candidate.
Exactly. Imagine this. You get two votes. The first one, called Erststimme, is for a specific person in your district. Think of it as choosing your local representative, like a city council member.
Okay, so that's my direct voice in my community. What about the second vote?
That's the Zweitstimme, and it's for a political party. This vote determines the overall proportion of seats each party gets in the Bundestag, Germany's parliament.
So with the first vote, I'm picking a person, and with the second, I'm backing a team. What's the strategy here?
Well, it allows voters to support a local candidate they believe in, even if they don't belong to their preferred party. At the same time, it ensures that the overall makeup of parliament reflects the broader political landscape.
Okay, fascinating. So it's like a balancing act, making sure both individual voices and party representation are heard. Now, why is this even a snap election? Didn't Germany just have an election recently?
They did, yeah. Back in 2021, Olaf Scholz, the current chancellor, from the SPD party, he formed a coalition government with the Greens. And the FDP, it was called, dubbed the Traffic Light Coalition because of their party colors, red, green, and yellow.
Cute name. But it sounds like things went off the rails.
To put it mildly, yeah. There were major disagreements within the coalition, clashes over economic policies, immigration, and even climate change initiatives. It all culminated in a political deadlock, forcing this snap election.
Wow, a political drama, worthy of a Netflix series. Okay, so new election, new possibilities. Let's meet the main contenders, vying for power. In this high-stakes game, who are the key players and what are they all about?
All right. We got 5 major parties to watch. First up is the CDU-CSU, the center-right bloc, currently leading in the polls. Their leader is Friedrich Merz. He's advocating for traditional values, economic growth, and, you guessed it, stricter immigration controls. They appeal to voters who value stability and a more conservative approach.
So they're like the back-to-basics party. Who else is in the running?
Next, we have the incumbent, Olaf Scholz, and the SPD, a center-left party, focused on social welfare, economic stability, and a strong pro-European stance. They're facing an uphill battle after the coalition drama, trying to convince voters they can be trusted to lead again.
It's always tough being the incumbent, especially after a rocky term. Now, I've heard whispers about a party gaining traction, particularly in certain parts of Germany. Fill me in.
You're talking about the AfD, their right-wing populist party, led by Tino Kruppala and Alice Weidel. And their platform centers on nationalism, skepticism towards the European Union, and, yes, a very strong anti-immigration stance.
Okay, so they're tapping into a different segment of the electorate, those perhaps feeling disillusioned with the status quo. Who are the other players on the field?
We've got the Greens, led by Robert Habeck, all about climate policies, renewable energy, and social justice. They were part of the previous coalition, but have faced criticism for some of their policy compromises. And lastly, we have the Free Democrats, or FDP, led by Christian Lindner. They champion free markets, less government intervention, and a focus on digital transformation. They also took a hit in popularity after their time in the coalition.
Wow, what a lineup. It sounds like German voters have a diverse set of choices, each reflecting very different priorities and visions for the country's future. But what are the issues that will truly sway voters? What's at stake in this election, beyond the party politics?
Well, from what we're seeing in the polls and public discourse, there are 4 key issues dominating the campaign: migration and asylum policies, economic stability and inflation, energy and climate, and finally, security and crime. These issues are deeply intertwined. They speak to the anxieties and aspirations of German citizens.
Okay, so 4 key issues, each with the potential to be a game changer. Let's unpack these one by one. Starting with migration. Germany's seen a lot of immigration, in recent years, and it seems to be a hot-button issue for voters. What's the backstory here?
Yeah, you're right. This isn't just a political talking point. Germany has experienced significant waves of migration over the past decade, particularly during the 2015 refugee crisis, when over 1 million asylum seekers arrived. This influx put a strain on resources and sparked debates about integration and security.
And then there were those high-profile incidents involving migrants, which, while statistically rare, really captured public attention and fueled anxieties. How has this shaped the political landscape?
It's been a defining factor. It's pushed the issue of migration to the forefront of the political agenda and given rise to parties like the AfD, who capitalize on these anxieties. It's also forced the other parties to grapple with how to address these concerns while upholding humanitarian values.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers. How are the different parties approaching this? We know the CDU-CSU and AfD are calling for stricter border controls and limits on asylum seekers. What's driving their stance?
They argue that Germany has reached its limit in terms of integration, that further immigration, particularly from non-European countries, threatens German culture, security, and economic stability. They point to the strain on social welfare systems.
And the challenges of integrating people from different cultural backgrounds. They appeal to voters who feel overwhelmed by the pace of change and long for a sense of stability and national identity. Yeah, it sounds like a debate about more than just practicalities, touching on these deeper anxieties about identity and belonging in a changing world. But it's not the only issue weighing on voters' minds. What about the economy? Even Germany, an economic powerhouse, seems to be facing some turbulence.
It's true. Even Germany isn't immune to global economic headwinds. They're dealing with high inflation, sluggish growth, and the looming energy crisis. These are issues hitting people's wallets and creating a lot of uncertainty about the future.
So what's the root cause of these economic woes? Is it just the usual suspects, like, the global pandemic hangover and the war in Ukraine?
Those are definitely major factors, yeah. The pandemic just wreaked havoc on global supply chains, leading to shortages and price hikes. And then the war in Ukraine sent energy prices skyrocketing, and that further destabilized the global economy.
And Germany's heavy reliance on Russian gas has made them especially vulnerable to energy shortages. And price volatility, right?
Absolutely. Plus, we can't forget about the elephant in the room: climate change. The transition to a low-carbon economy is essential, but it also presents significant challenges. For industries reliant on fossil fuels, Germany, as a major industrial power, faces a tricky balancing act.
So it's a complex web of global and domestic factors. With all these challenges, how are the political parties proposing to steer the German economy through this storm? What are their economic game plans?
Well, as you might expect, the political spectrum offers very different solutions. The CDU-CSU and the FDP, they're pushing for their classic free market playbook: tax cuts, deregulation, and a focus on fiscal responsibility.
So they're advocating for less government intervention, letting the market forces do their thing. What about the other side of the aisle?
Well, the SPD and the Greens are taking a more interventionist approach. They're emphasizing government investments in infrastructure, education, and, importantly, renewable energy. They also want to strengthen social safety nets to protect those most vulnerable to economic shocks.
It sounds like a classic battle of ideologies. One side betting on market-driven solutions, the other on a more active role for the government. Now, speaking of renewable energy, let's talk about the issue that's intrinsically linked to the economy: energy and climate change. We've talked about Germany's reliance on Russian gas, but where do they stand in their energy transition?
Germany has actually been a pioneer in renewable energy, making substantial investments in solar, wind, and other clean technologies. However, the reality is they still depend on fossil fuels, particularly coal and natural gas, for a large chunk of their energy needs.
And breaking up with fossil fuels is never easy, economically or politically. What are the party's visions for Germany's energy future? What kind of energy mix are they proposing?
The Greens, true to their name, are pushing for a full speed-ahead transition to renewable energy. They want to shut down coal-fired power plants and rapidly phase out natural gas. They argue that this move is crucial, not only for environmental reasons, but also for energy security and long-term economic competitiveness.
It's a bold vision, but are the other parties on board with such a rapid transition?
There's a spectrum of opinions. The SPD supports the energy transition, but advocates for a more measured approach, a gradual shift, to minimize economic disruption. They're also open to exploring other energy sources, like nuclear power, to create a more diversified energy mix.
So a bit more cautious, wanting to keep the lights on while transitioning. What about the CDE-CSU and the FDP? Where do they stand on the energy debate?
They're more hesitant about rushing into a renewable energy utopia. They express concerns about costs, reliability issues with renewable sources, and the potential impact on industries still reliant on fossil fuels.
So they're the slow and steady wins the race team, emphasizing economic stability over a rapid energy revolution. Okay, we've talked about immigration, the economy, and energy. Now let's shift gears to the issue that often hits closest to home: security and crime. This topic has been particularly sensitive in recent years, especially with the influx of migrants.
Absolutely. There's a palpable sense of unease among some segments of the German population. They perceive rising crime rates and social unrest, often linking it to the influx of migrants, even though statistically crime rates in Germany remain relatively low.
It's a reminder that perceptions can often be more potent than statistics in shaping public opinion. So how are the parties responding to these concerns? What are their solutions for creating a safer Germany?
The AfD, unsurprisingly, has seized upon this issue, exploiting feels about crime and immigration to bolster their support. They're advocating for a hardline approach, more police, stricter sentencing, and tighter border controls.
A classic law and order platform. Are the other parties also shifting towards a tougher stance on crime?
The CDU-CSU are also emphasizing law and order, but their approach is more nuanced. They want to strengthen police forces, enhance intelligence gathering, and focus on tackling organized crime.
So a more strategic approach, not just a knee-jerk reaction. What about the SPD and the Greens? How are they addressing these anxieties about safety and security?
Well, they acknowledge the need for public safety, but emphasize a more holistic approach. They believe in tackling the root causes of crime: poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. Their focus is on investing in social programs, education, and job training to prevent crime and promote social integration. They also believe in community policing, building trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
It's a different philosophy, focusing on prevention and addressing underlying societal issues rather than just punishment. So we've explored four major issues shaping this German election: migration, the economy, energy and climate, and security. And what's striking is how intertwined these issues are. They're not isolated policy areas. They're all interconnected,
Yep.
reflecting the complexities of modern German society.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is how these issues resonate beyond Germany's borders. They mirror the challenges and anxieties being grappled with in countries around the world. It's a reminder that Germany isn't just electing a new government. They're grappling with questions that are shaping the future of Europe and the world.
Yeah, it's a great point. These issues are playing out on a global stage, and Germany, as a leading power, can't ignore that wider context. So in this final part, let's zoom out and examine what this election means for Germany's role in the world. We've talked about the domestic impact, but how might the outcome affect its relationships with other countries, its influence in international organizations, and its approach to global challenges?
Well, the first and most immediate impact will be felt within the European Union. Germany, it's the EU's economic engine and a driving force behind many of its policies. So the election results, they could significantly influence the direction of the EU, its ability to tackle shared challenges, and its overall stability.
So let's play out some scenarios. If the CDU-CSU, the center-right bloc, takes charge, how might that reshape Germany's approach to the EU?
The CDU-CSU has historically been a champion of European integration, but they've also been vocal critics of certain EU policies, particularly on fiscal matters and immigration. Under their leadership, we might see Germany taking a more assertive stance within the EU.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice?
Imagine Germany pushing for greater fiscal discipline among member states, advocating for stricter border controls across the EU, and perhaps adopting a more cautious approach to expanding the bloc further. They might prioritize German national interests more prominently within the EU framework.
Interesting. And what if the SPD, the center-left party, manages to hold on to power? How would their vision for the EU differ?
The SPD is also pro-European, but they tend to be more integrationist in their outlook. They'd likely prioritize strengthening social cohesion within the EU, championing investments in shared projects like infrastructure and research, and promoting a more unified front on foreign policy and security matters.
So they'd be pushing for a more tightly knit EU, working collaboratively to address common challenges. Now, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the AfD. They've been openly critical of the EU, even suggesting Germany should leave the Eurozone. What would their rise mean for the future of the EU?
The AfD's potential influence is a concern for many, in Brussels and beyond. If they were to gain significant power in the German government, it could severely test the EU's unity and stability.
Their skepticism towards the EU is well documented. What specifically are they advocating for?
Well, they've called for a return to national sovereignty, a rollback of EU regulations, and even hinted at a potential exit from the euro currency. Their rise reflects a broader trend of populist and nationalist sentiment in Europe. And this, poses a fundamental challenge to the EU's core principles.
Yeah, it sounds like the EU is holding its breath during this German election. The outcome could determine whether the bloc takes a step towards deeper integration or grapples with a resurgence of nationalism. Now let's shift our focus beyond Europe. How might the election results impact Germany's relationship with its key ally, the United States?
Yeah. The U.S.-German partnership is crucial on the world stage. It's built on shared values, economic ties, and security cooperation. But, like any relationship, it's had its ups and downs, especially in recent years.
There were definitely some tensions during the Trump era. How might a CDU-CSU-led government navigate this relationship?
They'd likely prioritize a strong alliance with the U.S., especially on defense and security issues. We might see them advocating for increased German military spending, a greater contribution to NATO, and a firmer stance towards Russia and China.
So, a more assertive Germany on the international stage, aligning closely with U.S. strategic interests. But wouldn't there be points of friction as well?
Certainly. The CDU-CSU might not always see eye to eye with the U.S. on issues like trade policy, and they might be less inclined to, automatically follow the U.S. lead on certain foreign policy matters.
And what about the SPD? How would their approach to the U.S. differ?
Well, the SPD has historically been more cautious about close military ties with the U.S. They tend to emphasize diplomacy and multilateralism in their foreign policy approach.
So perhaps a less militaristic approach, focusing on dialogue and cooperation. On the global stage, would that mean distancing themselves from the U.S.?
Not necessarily. They would likely find common ground with the U.S. on issues like climate change, human rights, and promoting democratic values. Their approach would be about finding a balance, maintaining a strong alliance, while asserting their own foreign policy priorities.
It seems like, regardless of who wins, the U.S.-German relationship will remain vital. But the dynamics might shift depending on the party in power. Now, before we wrap up, let's zoom out even further. Consider how this election might impact Germany's approach to global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and the rise of authoritarianism.
Yeah, these are the defining issues of our time, and Germany, as a leading power, has a responsibility to play a constructive role.
Let's start with climate change. How might the different parties tackle this existential threat?
Well, the Greens, as you'd expect, are the most ambitious. They'd push for aggressive emissions reductions, a rapid transition to renewable energy, and a leading role for Germany in international climate negotiations. The SPD is also committed to climate action, but their approach might be more pragmatic, balancing environmental goals with economic considerations.
So a difference in pace and intensity, but a shared commitment to tackling climate change. What about the CDU-CSU?
The CDU-CSU acknowledges the importance of addressing climate change, but might be more cautious about rapid decarbonization. They'd likely prioritize technological innovation and market-based solutions.
And the AfD?
The AfD has expressed skepticism about the severity of climate change and opposed ambitious climate policies. Their stance puts them at odds with the scientific consensus and the direction most of the world is moving in.
Yeah, it highlights the stark differences in how these parties view this global challenge. What about pandemics, an issue that has, brought the world to its knees in recent years?
The SPD and the Greens would likely prioritize global health cooperation, advocating for a stronger World Health Organization, and investing in pandemic preparedness. The CDU-CSU might take a more national interest-focused approach, prioritizing securing access to vaccines and medical supplies for Germany.
And how might they approach the growing threat of authoritarianism around the world?
The SPD and the Greens would likely be strong voices in defense of democracy and human rights. They'd support pro-democracy movements globally and advocate for sanctions against authoritarian regimes. The CDU-CSU might adopt a more pragmatic approach, balancing their values with strategic and economic interests.
So a potential for different approaches, ranging from a values-driven foreign policy to a more pragmatic one. It's clear that the choices German voters make in this election have far-reaching consequences, not just for Germany, but for the world.
Absolutely. This election is about much more than just choosing a new government for Germany. It's about shaping the future of Europe, influencing the balance of power on the world stage, and determining how Germany will contribute to tackling the defining challenges of our time.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the intricacies of the German electoral system, dissected the key issues shaping the campaign, and zoomed out to examine the global implications of this pivotal election. We've seen how the decisions made in Berlin will reverberate far beyond Germany's borders, impacting everything from the future of the European Union to the fight against climate change to the defense of democratic values. As we conclude, we leave you with this thought. The world is watching Germany, and the choices made in this election will shape not only Germany's destiny but also the global landscape for years to come.